Sergeant Mason Herrera didn't flinch when the bailiff clicked the handcuffs shut around his wrists. He'd felt worse, shrapnel in his side, the burning flash of an IED, the weight of a fallen comrade's blood soaking into his uniform. But this was different. This was the betrayal that stung. The courtroom smelled of wood polish and old paper, but beneath it all was something else. The stink of judgment. Rows of spectators filled the benches, some in military caps nodding solemnly, others whispering, casting glances, snapping silent photos with their eyes. They didn't see a man. They saw a headline. A war hero turned security risk. The prosecutor, a man too clean for truth, adjusted his tie and leaned forward with practiced confidence while the judge scanned over the pages of testimony like she already knew the ending. But Mason didn't look at them. His eyes drifted to the gallery where one seat remained empty, the one Rex used to sit beside during training exercises, on-base meetings, even during briefings. His dog, his partner, his brother. The prosecution had made it clear. Sergeant Herrera was being tried not just for negligence, but for leaking encrypted intel to foreign hands. The fallout had been fatal. 2 American agents dead, a third unaccounted for. Mason said nothing during the initial interrogations, nothing during arraignment, and nothing now, because the moment he'd been arrested, they'd taken Rex from him. No explanation, no reunion, just cold separation. The courtroom's fluorescent lights flickered as an overhead vent buzzed to life, scattering a few loose pages on the prosecutor's table. No one noticed Mason's hands twitch slightly as he heard the soft hum. Too much like a drone's approach. He shook it off. He'd learned to hide the tremors, the memories, but he couldn't hide the ache in his chest where his dog's absence carved a hollow. He'd trained Rex from pup to soldier, watched him save civilians in Kandahar, drag Mason from rubble after an ambush, even detect a pressure plate no one else had seen. That dog was his breath in a firestorm, and now they wouldn't even let him say goodbye. The public defender beside him, overworked and underpaid, cleared his throat nervously. "Mason," he whispered, "do you want to testify?" Mason turned his head slowly, eyes dark with exhaustion. He didn't speak, just shook his head. There was no point, not when the one soul who could tell the truth didn't have a voice in this courtroom. Not unless they let the dog in. Rex sat motionless in the cold steel kennel, tucked away in the courthouse basement, his massive frame coiled with tension, eyes locked on the door like he was waiting for a command that never came. The fluorescent light above him flickered, buzzing faintly, but Rex didn't blink. He hadn't moved in hours, hadn't touched his water bowl. The food, untouched for 2 days, lay scattered in the corner where he'd nudged it away with his snout, not out of defiance but confusion, because something wasn't right. The leash that once meant duty now reeked of separation. The humans around him spoke softly, stepped lightly, avoided eye contact. They didn't understand what he did. Something was wrong with his handler. The bailiff assigned to check on him each hour didn't know much about war dogs, but even he could tell something wasn't normal. "He hasn't barked once," he muttered to the clerk upstairs. "Not since he got here, just stares at that damn door like he's guarding it." But no one listened, no one cared. Upstairs, Mason's public defender, a man too young to understand what it meant to carry another man's life in your hands, stood before the judge with papers trembling in his grip. "Your Honor," he said, voice cracked from lack of sleep, "my client has made one request, just one, that his military K-9 be allowed into the courtroom. He believes," the judge raised a hand, barely glancing up, This is a court of law, not a kennel. Request denied. She turned the page of her notes as if dismissing a child asking for a toy. The clerk marked it off the docket. Denied. Final. No appeal, room for sentiment. In the basement, Rex shifted slightly. Just a twitch. His ears flicked forward. Somewhere far above him, he sensed movement. He didn't need sound. He felt vibrations. He knew Mason was close, but not safe. That feeling from the field, the scent of adrenaline and fear, hovered like smoke on a breeze. Rex lowered his head, placing it between his paws, but his eyes never left the door. He wasn't trained to disobey, but he was trained to protect. And now the one man who ever saw him as more than a tool was in danger. Rex didn't understand courtrooms or motions or politics. He understood loyalty, and if they wouldn't open the door, he'd wait. Because something inside him told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Lucinda Herrera sat in the second row of the gallery, spine straight despite the ache in her bones, her fingers trembling ever so slightly as they gripped the worn photograph in her lap. The edges were curled, the ink faded from years of love and sunlight. But the image still burned like it was taken yesterday. Mason in uniform, one hand resting on Rex's back, both of them looking forward with the same unwavering focus. It was the photo used in every article that called her son a traitor. But it wasn't that image she saw. It was the moment before the shutter clicked, when Mason had whispered something to Rex and the dog's ears perked, their bond tighter than blood. She blinked back the tears she refused to let fall. Crying would have meant surrender. Behind her, two men in gray suits sat too stiff, too composed for ordinary observers. One leaned in, voice hushed but urgent. They're going to bring up the Ramirez file. The other frowned, his jaw tightening. We told them. That was sealed. Who cleared that? Lucinda didn't turn, but she heard every word. Years of raising a soldier taught her the importance of stillness, how to be present without being noticed. She let the conversation wash over her, quiet as wind, but sharp as knives. If they link the drop site to Delta Bravo, the first whispered, the whole operation blows wide open. They'll know the real leak came from upstairs. The second man muttered a curse under his breath. Mason was supposed to be the fall guy. This was supposed to be clean. Lucinda closed her eyes, heart thudding against her ribs. There it was. Not just suspicion, confirmation. Her son wasn't just innocent. He was being used, sacrificed. She looked toward the front of the courtroom where Mason sat shackled and still. He hadn't looked back once. He didn't need to. He knew she was there. She always would be. The judge called a recess, her gavel echoing through the chamber like a shot. The suits behind Lucinda stood quickly, their conversation cut off, faces masked in practiced indifference. But she didn't move. She stayed seated, her grip tightening on the photo. If they thought she would sit quietly while her son bore the shame of their sins, they didn't know a mother's fight. Somewhere beneath layers of lies, the truth waited, and Lucinda Herrera had just decided she would be the one to drag it into the light. The third day of the trial began like a funeral, quiet, tense, and heavy with things no one dared say out loud. Mason sat in the defendant's chair, his face unreadable, his posture rigid, as if the chains weren't holding him still, but pride. The prosecutor adjusted his tie and approached the jury with the ease of a man who thought the outcome was already carved in stone. Behind him, the screen displayed encrypted files and redacted mission briefs, evidence that had been scrubbed, rewritten, and spoon-fed to the court. Mason didn't even glance at it. His eyes were on the door, the one they still hadn't opened. Lucinda Herrera rose from the gallery like a wave pushed by a storm, her hand clenched at her sides, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Your Honor," she said, the courtroom stilling, "he doesn't want sympathy. He's not asking for pity. He's asking for justice. And I'm asking for one mercy. Let the dog in. He was there. He was with my son. If you won't listen to Mason, maybe you'll listen to the one who can't speak." The judge, irritated, stared down over her glasses, fingers steepled, exhaling through her nose. There was a long pause. You could hear the ticking of a watch, then finally a nod. "Let the dog in," she muttered. A bailiff moved toward the side door, keys jingling like wind chimes before a storm. When it opened, the air shifted. The sound of claws on tile echoed faintly before the courtroom fell into a hush, so thick it could suffocate. Rex stepped in, slow and deliberate, as if the hallway itself were hallowed ground. His coat was duller now, streaked with gray along his muzzle, but his presence filled the room like thunder before a flash. He didn't bark, didn't wag. He scanned the room once, his eyes cutting through the prosecutor, the jury, even the judge, before landing on Mason. And then he moved. One step, then another, until he reached him. No one breathed. Mason looked down, his throat tightening as Rex closed the distance. The dog stopped, lowered his head, and gently placed it on Mason's lap, the chain between Mason's cuffs clinking as his hands twitched involuntarily. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the courtroom, but in every soul watching, because a dog who hadn't moved, hadn't eaten, hadn't made a sound, had come not just for a goodbye. He'd come for the truth. Rex didn't move at first. His head remained pressed against Mason's lap like a soldier holding post, unmoved by the murmurs rippling through the courtroom. But then, subtle, sudden, his nose twitched. Once, twice, his ears tilted forward. The tension in his shoulders shifted. Mason felt it before anyone else did. That tiny change in posture, a stillness before the storm. Rex lifted his head slowly, nostrils flaring. Something was here, something familiar. Not just a scent, but a memory wrapped in adrenaline and ash. His gaze broke from Mason, drifted across the courtroom, then locked onto a point near the prosecution's table. The prosecutor kept speaking, oblivious, stacking his closing argument with polished words and practiced certainty. But Rex was no longer listening. The dog stepped away, slow and purposeful, ignoring the bailiff's instinctive flinch. His nails clicked against the wood floor as he moved down the aisle, drawing the gaze of every spectator, every juror, every camera. The judge raised her hand. "Remove the animal," she said sharply. But the bailiff hesitated. He didn't move. No one did. Rex reached the edge of the prosecution's table and sniffed once, twice, then stopped. His body stiffened. A low, guttural growl rolled from deep within his chest. The sound was raw, not a threat, a warning. Before anyone could react, Rex lunged sideways, his powerful jaws snapping down on a tan manila folder, half tucked beneath the prosecutor's stack of papers. The room exploded in motion. "Hey!" the prosecutor barked, lunging forward as Rex ripped the folder open and sent its contents scattering like leaves in wind. Papers flared out across the floor, classified briefings, encrypted mission logs, satellite prints. The header on one read, "Operation Glass Raven, Level 5 clearance required." Another showed a location grid with a hand-scrawled note, "No comms, eyes only, order bypassed." Mason's head snapped up. Lucinda gasped. The courtroom, moments ago rigid with structure, now pulsed with chaos. Get the dog under control, the judge screamed, her gavel slamming again and again. But no one moved to touch Rex, not even the guards, because something was wrong, deeply wrong, and the evidence lay not in what was being said, but in what had just been uncovered, teeth torn and undeniable. Rex stepped back, eyes burning, tail stiff. He didn't need to bark. The papers on the floor were already screaming. For one long second, no one moved. The scattered documents lay across the courtroom floor like landmines, each one more damning than the last. A red-faced military liaison from the Department of Defense lunged forward, his boots thudding against the polished wood as he reached for the folder. But Rex growled, low and steady, teeth still clamped around the last classified sheet. The man froze, hand halfway out, eyes locked on the bow like he just remembered exactly what Rex had been trained to do. Mason sat frozen in his seat, chest rising with disbelief as he stared at the documents. Pages he had never seen before. Pages that bore the same mission headers from the op that destroyed his career, but with details twisted, names omitted, orders rewritten. His heart thudded as the realization landed. These weren't just forgotten files. They were the truth they'd buried him to hide. Lucinda stepped forward slowly, her heels echoing in the stunned silence. She knelt beside one of the scattered sheets and picked it up, her fingers trembling as she scanned the page. Then she looked up, her voice cracked, but she didn't waver. This, this isn't in the discovery packet. This isn't in evidence. She held it out with a shaking hand. The judge squinted, snatched it from her, and leaned closer, her brows furrowed. What is this? The prosecutor shot to his feet, his voice suddenly, Your Honor, I don't know how that folder ended up. You don't know, she snapped, eyes narrowing. You're the one controlling the prosecution's evidence. It wasn't relevant, he muttered, but his voice betrayed him. Too fast, too thin. It was extraneous material. It was never part of the formal review. Then why, the judge asked, holding up the paper with deliberate care, does this document contain direct satellite coordination logs from the exact time and location of Operation Glass Raven, the very event this case hinges on? The prosecutor's face turned ashen. Jurors whispered behind their hands. One of them pointed at a printed name in the corner of a sheet, a name that wasn't Mason's, a name tied to a command post high above the clearance. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scrambled for photos. Defense attorneys surged forward. A paralegal knocked over a chair. But Rex stood still in the middle of it all, the lone calm in the storm. His job wasn't over yet, because the chain reaction had just begun, and it was only going to burn higher from here. The courtroom was still trembling from the fallout when a junior clerk spotted it, small, silver, and half wedged beneath one of the scattered folders. A thumb drive. The kind issued for encrypted field logs, easy to miss unless you were trained to look. She picked it up, eyes narrowing at the faded serial number scratched into the casing. This came from the dog's vest, she murmured. It was clipped into his side harness. No one searched him when they brought him in. She glanced up, unsure. A tech specialist from the court's IT team was summoned, hustling into chambers with a laptop and a cable, beads of sweat already collecting at his temples. The judge, seated behind closed doors with both legal teams and the military liaison, folded her arms and nodded once. Yeah. Play it. A moment later, the screen lit up. Static buzzed through the speakers, faint at first, then sharpened into voices, muffled by distance and adrenaline. Mason's voice broke through the noise, clear and urgent. Command, this is Bravo 6. Repeat. I've intercepted comms on our encrypted channel. Unknown signal bouncing through Delta Tower. Possible breach, requesting immediate lockdown protocol. The room froze. The liaison's face twitched. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The audio continued. Another voice entered. Calm, steady, higher ranked. Copy Bravo 6. Do not pursue. I repeat, do not pursue. Mason's voice came again, confused. Sir, it's our system. Someone's piggybacking our feed. If we don't act now, then the voice returned. Scrub the source, redirect attention, pin it on Herrera. Understood. Silence. Then the transmission cut. The room didn't move. No one breathed. The clerk who had found the drive turned pale, her hand slowly lowering from her mouth. The prosecutor's pen rolled off the table. The military liaison reached for the laptop, but the judge held up her hand like a blade. Don't touch it, she snapped. Her voice, once clipped and disinterested, now trembled with restrained fury. That's a field log, a direct feed, and it's admissible. Across the room, Mason sat motionless, his eyes locked on the screen, his face stone. Rex, now lying at his feet, looked up at him, quiet, watchful, waiting. For the first time in months, the truth had spoken. Not from lips, not from lawyers, but from a whisper buried in a forgotten file in a dog's silent loyalty. The lie had unraveled, and the echo of that calm, deliberate voice, pin it on Herrera, was about to bring down the house. The courtroom, once buzzing with certainty, now felt like a fault line seconds from collapse. The judge leaned forward slowly, her voice measured, razor sharp. Mr. Callahan, she said, fixing the prosecutor with a gaze that could cut through armor, is it true you received the folder found at your desk 2 weeks prior to trial? Callahan, suddenly smaller in his tailored suit, swallowed hard. His jaw twitched. Yes, Your Honor, he said, voice hoarse. It was submitted during discovery by an anonymous source. I reviewed the paperwork, but didn't find anything I believed to be relevant to the case. The judge's eyes narrowed. And the thumb drive? Silent, Callahan shifted, sweat collecting at his collar. It was labeled K9 cam log, he muttered. We assumed it was raw footage from a training exercise. You never opened it? No, Your Honor. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It pulsed with disbelief. A courtroom built on procedure now cracked under the weight of something messier. Truth denied, not by accident, but by arrogance. The judge's gavel slammed once. Immediate recess, she said sharply. I will be reviewing whether this court has been misled. Bailiff, secure all trial materials. No one is to leave the premises without clearance. Reporters outside didn't need the verdict to know a story had just detonated. The doors flew open as journalists swarmed, flashes from cameras bouncing off marble columns, microphones extended like weapons. Was evidence suppressed? Will the case be thrown out? Is Sergeant Herrera innocent? Inside, calm settled in the eye of the storm. The jury filed out in stunned silence, heads down, avoiding Mason's eyes. He didn't blame them. Not yet. They were soldiers in this too, caught in a system that told them who to believe. Mason remained in his seat, chains still clasped at his wrists, shoulders still squared like a man used to carrying more than his share. And beneath him, Rex lay quietly. For the first time in hours, the dog's tail moved. Just once, a slow, steady thump against the floor, as if acknowledging the storm had shifted. Mason glanced down, his voice barely audible, but heavy with gratitude. Good boy. It was the first thing he'd said all week, not to the court, not to the press, just to the one being who'd never needed proof. Rex didn't look up. He didn't have to. He already knew. And in that single exchange, it was clear. The prosecution might be fractured, but the bond between soldier and dog was unbreakable. The jury never made it back to their seats. Before they could even file into the courtroom, the judge returned alone, robe trailing like a shadow behind her. Her expression was steel, but her eyes betrayed the storm beneath, anger, disbelief, and something more dangerous than either. Clarity. The room fell into a hush as she reached the bench. She didn't waste a second. Due to the failure of the prosecution to disclose critical exculpatory evidence, and in light of newly admitted recordings that directly contradict the charges brought forth, this court finds the integrity of the proceedings irreparably compromised. The case against Sergeant Mason Herrera is dismissed, effective immediately. Gasps tore through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. Somewhere, someone clapped once, then stopped. Unsure, Mason didn't move. He couldn't. The weight of months in a cell, the headlines, the accusations, it all pressed down like gravity had doubled. Then the cuffs came off. Cold steel slipped from his wrist with a click that echoed louder than the gavel. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if remembering they belonged to him. For the first time since his arrest, Mason stood without chains. The courtroom rose with him. Not in chaos, not yet, in something softer. Applause, quiet at first, hesitant, spread through the room like the first sparks of a fire long denied oxygen. Not everyone clapped. Some remained still, skeptical, but enough did. Enough to matter. Reporters surged toward the aisle, cameras blinking, microphones stretching. Questions flew like arrows. Sergeant Herrera, how does it feel? Will you sue the Department of Defense? Is the war dog the reason you're free? Mason lifted his hand, not to wave, not to speak, but to stop them, just enough for silence to reclaim the space. Then he turned away. He walked past the crowd, past the judge, past the man who once called him a traitor. And he dropped to one knee beside the only soul who'd never needed convincing. Rex was waiting, tongue out, tail still, eyes locked on his partner. Mason pressed his forehead to the dog's and whispered, "You saved me again." Rex licked his cheek. The cameras caught it all. The soldier with tears in his eyes, the war dog beside him, the storm behind them. Before Mason even reached the courthouse steps, the moment had already gone viral. Not as a scandal, not as a scandal, but as something the world had nearly forgotten. Honor, loyalty, and a truth that barked louder than lies ever could. The ceremony was quiet, held on a rain-washed afternoon beneath a gray sky that hadn't decided whether to mourn or celebrate. Rows of uniforms lined the perimeter, stiff with decorum, while a folded flag flapped gently on his post. Mason stood beside Rex, not in shackles, not in disgrace, but in full dress, metal shining against the fabric of a uniform he thought he'd never wear again. A general stepped forward with practiced solemnity, holding a small velvet box in one hand and an envelope in the other. The envelope bore a gold seal, an official apology from the Department of Defense. It said what it needed to in a few cold paragraphs. "We regret the mishandling. We recognize your service. We acknowledge the failure." But the medal spoke louder. It was the same award Mason had once earned for valor, now pinned beside a second, this time for exposure of systemic failure. And Rex, standing tall beside him, was honored with a service commendation and a new patch on his vest. Guardian, truth finder. The cameras flashed, but Mason didn't smile. He wasn't angry, just tired, grateful, ready to stop carrying the weight of a battle he hadn't started. When reporters called out questions, "Will you write a book? How did you know the dog remembered?" He said nothing. He simply placed a hand on Rex's back and walked away. A week later, Congress passed a new amendment under the Military Canine Operations Act. Anytime a handler is accused of misconduct, their canine partner's body cam logs must be immediately reviewed before any court proceedings. It was dubbed Rex's Rule by the press. Mason didn't comment. He was already gone. He found work in a small dog rehabilitation center outside San Antonio, tucked between tall trees and quiet roads, where retired war dogs were trained to live again. No concrete, no courts, just peace. Mason spent his days in open fields, helping dogs find their footing after trauma, after duty, after loss. And Rex, now a few steps slower, followed him everywhere. Never on leash, never commanded, always beside him. One afternoon, a filmmaker caught them on camera. Mason sitting on the porch, boots kicked off, legs stretched in the sun. Rex curled beside him, eyes half closed, breathing soft. The image went viral within hours, but it wasn't the frame that stuck. It was the caption beneath it, posted by someone who'd watched the trial unfold, who'd seen what silence could prove. He never needed words. His dog told the truth. And as Mason sat beneath the fading sky, his boots off, his battle behind him, and Rex curled at his feet, there were no medals, no speeches, no noise. Just peace, the kind you can't win with a rifle or earn in a courtroom. The kind that comes when the world finally sees what loyalty looks like and listens. Some stories don't need loud endings. They just need truth. And sometimes that truth walks on four legs. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice can come from the unlikeliest of heroes, then subscribe. Because we tell stories that matter. Stories that uncover, inspire, and refuse to be forgotten. And trust me, there's more where this came from.